So I guess thank you and welcome to our last workshop of this series. We've now made it through 5 of them, and today is probably going to be a pretty cool one as we get to present the information back to the group from what we accomplished through those previous 5. And so I want to make sure you notice that there is the attendance link. As I said, there might be prizes. Stressing might, but there could be. All right, so before we began, our initial goal here was to explore the challenges and potential strategies facing this community. And I'm thrilled to be here today now presenting back to what we have come back with for exactly that goal. So as the flow of the day today, as you see, the entire session will be recorded. This will help us out in moving forward. Then I'm going to give a small background of how we got to the place we are, because we do have a lot of new faces today, and I don't want much of this to come as a surprise of how'd you come up with that. So there is a little bit of background. And then the majority of our time today will be spent on the pillar presentations, which are our 6 components that we have found of our programs. And they'll be about 10 minutes each, with about 5 minutes for Q&A afterward. And the presenter, as they're talking, they'll start seeing hearts showing up as they're moving forward with time. We got that covered, we're watching. Additionally, while we're presenting, we'd appreciate using the Zoom chat and putting your feedback, your questions in there. So we will have one of our organizing team members looking at that chat and pulling those questions forward, so that it might come to the discussion after, or they might be right away. So we also need that feedback moving forward as we pull it into the white paper. So any feedback, that's great. Throw it in the chat. This will help. Next slide. I shared this slide last time, but I wanted to bring your attention to it again. Our work here is really being noticed outside of this group, and we have a lot of eyes on this is exciting and what are we doing. So we've been talking in a few different venues, but I did the math this morning and we are coming up around 800 hours of investment time, and that's just at the meetings. So this is the workshops as well as the steering group that was meeting, and all of those, we are producing something of about 800 hours worth of work. Next slide. So there's absolutely no way I could have done this without the organizing team, and we've been probably meeting since September, I'm guessing, weekly. And while these might have appeared flawless right here, there's been a lot of work from No Innovation and the organizing team going into this, and sincere thank you on that one. And next slide. And finally, the stars of today are going to be the pillar volunteers, and they have helped wrangle each of these pillars from the starting place of here is simply just a title of a bucket of collected things, collected challenges, to kind of here's what's going on within this space. And I'm so grateful for all of your time between the sessions that you guys have spent on this. All right, so that brings me to how did we get to this place? I share this timeline as the processes we've worked through to get us here, but truly bring your eyes to the bottom of it with the accomplishments, and that's much easier to process. So in early November, we had our first workshop, and we split into 6 smaller affinity groups And then we self-selected our groups. We self-selected them based on the program maturity. So were you early or established within your programs? What type of regulations was your primary role dealing with? So biomedical, or was it Department of Defense? And then the other group that we split by was your primary role more technical or business focused? And within these groups, we brainstormed what the challenges looked like from everyone's perspective, and we prioritized them as a group. While this was designed to find similar institutions to your perspective, it also was designed to find out what set us apart and what were our differences within the space. This exercise helped us realize that it was not the maturity nor the types of regulations that divided us. The only difference that we found after that first exercise was it business or technical processes. These challenges that we brainstormed all became the foundation of what we grouped into other affinity groups. And these are the baseline of what we established for our pillars. So fast forward to today, and we've now formed a start of a community. Absolutely. We've formed some great relationships. We've developed a draft of probably the first community-driven white paper within the research institutions on what the landscape looks like within this space. And we've also identified some of the challenges that we can look for the future to tackle. So I see this work as very valuable coming into what might be coming down the line, and this will be one of the key inputs. So with that, Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Carolyn, and welcome everyone. Thank you again for joining us for our final microlab. I'm just going to drop in the chat one more time this new Zoom link. So if you did share it and if you've just joined us, if you shared the Zoom link for today's session, please share this new one so everyone can join for our presentations. We're going to go into our pillar presentations. Each presenter will have 10 minutes. Tim will be screen sharing for you. You'll get little hearts from me around the 8-minute mark to let you know that you have 2 minutes left. And then we'll have 5 minutes after each presentation for Q&A. So please drop your questions into the chat. Our organizers will help us moderate that 5 minutes of Q&A. They'll read out your questions, and we'll try and get through as many as we can in that time. And am I missing anything? Tim, was that everything? Do you want to start screen sharing?
Yep, just send it to Jay. Thanks, Anne-Marie.
Yep, so Jay, pass to you to introduce our first pillar presenter.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. So first up, we're going to start off with the ownership and roles pillar, which is probably the most pivotal in making sure that you have a program that's functional. And so this afternoon, Cal Fry from Case Western Reserve is going to talk about what is involved and what's important in ownership and roles. Cal?
If I came at this pretty much thinking about, of course, our own institution and where we're at, because we don't have a program and we're looking at building one up. And so I'm speaking to people in a similar position. You may be farther along, you may be way, wondering what we're all talking about. So if you're starting a compliance program of this kind of magnitude, the best thing I think is to start with the researchers and recognize that even if those who have been in dealing with compliance, either in health sciences, for example, or working for Department of Defense projects, this is still a new environment, and it's going to be a broadening environment, picking up other people who haven't had to deal with this kind of thing before. So this is new and to some degree or another to all of us. And it will continue to be so because we're continually bringing in new researchers who, in graduate school, watch somebody else handle the details for them, and now they have to do it, perhaps at a new institution, learning the new rules. So it's all through this, the sense of training and education is going to be important. So in looking at, I've got two things I want to talk about here. One is what sort of roles are involved in organizing this program and operating it. And then the related one is who owns the process, who actually starts to pick it up and lead it and shepherd it along and make sure that the program is a success. Compliance is not just about information technology. You've got all kinds of other departments available and who have a role. And again, it comes back down to the researchers that are in the labs doing the work. They have certainly the strongest role involved in this. So what roles do we have? Who can fill those roles? And most importantly, if the program is going to be a success, you should find a sponsor. Is there someone, preferably in higher leadership, who can take charge of this, not necessarily from a day-to-day operational take charge standpoint, but someone who can really make sure that they're behind it, that they know that their influence is behind it, that other people see that this is a program that is going to succeed and that it has a champion. And finally, whatever organization and roles and team that comes together at my institution is going to be different from what shows up at yours. You've got different strengths, different weaknesses, different areas of responsibility and focus. And so your mileage may vary. Can I have the next slide, please? So in selecting the roles in this program, everybody needs to be somewhat on board, from the administrative side, but also the academics. And there are, I'll come back to that in a bit. Information technology is accustomed to supporting and building secure environments, but also look to the administrative side of things. You may have an Office of Research Administration, or you may call it something else here, but someone who organizes contracts, perhaps grants. You'll find that your institutional review board is a part of that structure. And these are the people that are already doing some of the kinds of things that we're talking about. Remember the finance, grants, contracts. The people that handle the money have some influence and power over the process. And they're in an easy position to look at a project that is going off the rails and say, no, we can't do that. We can't afford to do it. That's not going to fit within the budget. That's not going to fit within your grant availability. Grant money is available. And this is an important control. Another place to look for leadership in this area might be your Office of Institutional Risk or internal audit. And certainly those offices also would be involved in evaluating your progress and evaluating your program before, if you're working to some of the higher maturity models coming out, you have external auditors taking a look at your program. As I said, training and education are essential. Compliance does not come. This is a foreign concept that we're asking our researchers to do. They're in the business of generating and sharing data to the world, and we're in the business of taking data and keeping it safe and secure until it is ready to be shared. These outlooks, these philosophies don't necessarily go together in the same individual. as I say, research administration already hosts similar projects, similar responsibilities. And I'm seeing in my institution where that's a logical place where we can take ownership and drive the rest of the process. And using as a model, when I'm talking to people about how this might work, I use our existing institutional review board as a concept of, here's a group of people that look at projects, evaluate them, approve them, and help researchers do things in the right and proper manner. Next slide, please. So who owns for this? It depends on the strengths and weaknesses of who you have. You can start with the finances. I pay for it, I own it. You can look at grants and contracts. We have a strong program out of the, in one of our schools from the Grants and Contracts office that is also used to dealing with data security plans and data use agreements and organizing and with an eye toward complying with HIPAA regulations, for example. And this is a good model. This can work. Information security might be an office that is best equipped to take ownership if you have a strong InfoSec program. Another logical place to find ownership would be in your Office of Compliance, Privacy, Risk Management. Again, they're tasked with doing this sort of business. One of the suggestions that came up was internal audit. They could own the process, but I think they're better left as the final review, if you will, assessing the results, but not necessarily driving the process, driving the program. And again, as I say, what's I think is working out in our institution is that the Office of Research Administration is expanding its role to take on some of the supervision, take on ownership of compliance in this area. Next slide, please. So build your team. And as we're working through this, there's really two phases. There's the implementation phase where you're assembling the team and figuring out how this program is going to work and getting it off the ground. And then that will transition into an ongoing program. And you may well find that the people at the table best for the first phase for implementation won't stay. And there will be other people or other offices that are involved in keeping the program going after it's launched. It may be very useful to find a program manager and an official designated program manager to, particularly in the implementation portion of the program. And this could be a good place to hire a consultant if you don't have an office of trained program managers internally. Again, following on from that, once you're in the operation phase and you're starting to look at larger labs or larger groups, bringing them into compliance or fitting them into this model may also be best treated as a formal project with a program manager, steering them towards success. Smaller labs or individual groups may be handled a little more informally. Also, attend to communications with other offices outside the team. Report back and forth often, keep HR involved, keep other offices apprised of what's going on. The more open and clear this process can be, the more that it will be followed and the more likely you'll be successful. I see the hearts coming up on the screen. I think I've got one more slide here. And really, this is just a summary of what we've said already. Define your roles and responsibilities clearly. Make sure that your owner has authority to actually be successful. And remember that the whole point of the program is to smooth the way, perhaps standardize the situation so that your researchers know what they're doing, can more easily get their grants, do their work, run their labs, and publish their results. How do we help them achieve that goal?
Cal, thanks much. We didn't get any questions in the thing, but I did have a couple. And the first one I thought I'd ask is, have you at Case Western, where you're in this process, as many of us are, have you given some thought as to what forms of communication will be appropriate to do the communication that's needed?
Well, I find it's frequently useful to be able to blame other people. And part of our, so part of the communication is starting with, this is what the federal government is working on. And so part of our initial communication is just education, basically. The landscape is changing. These are the things that we're going to have to be looking at. And these are the things that you as a researcher are going to have to pay more attention to. And we're going to try to be here to help you. And so our communication comes both in general communications, via the academic side, through our research computing arm, which is where the group that is in IT that is usually supporting this kind of activity, and then very likely through our information security office as well. And all of these groups have pretty good relationships with the faculty so far. So I think we're in pretty good shape.
Great. And I've got one final question before we roll on to our next pillar, and that is, do you have any thoughts on, as you're getting the ball rolling, IS or IT, whichever group, not getting stuck with the ownership? Because I know as we worked on this together, there was a lot of talk about you can get stuck owning this and you may not be the best suited. So have you given some thought as to how you make sure that it's not you if you don't feel it's appropriate?
I think it's somewhat in the air, in that I was approached just yesterday by our research administration office to see if we could talk about a way of streamlining and expanding our approval process so that more and more research projects come up with a data security plan, which is a good place to begin with this. And this did not come from me calling on the Office of Institute or of Research Administration. They came to me asking for help with this initiative. So I think they're on the same page.
That have come. Cool. I see two questions that have come in that are fairly similar, and they are suggestions on getting the governance message in front of campus senior leadership that ultimately, empower making sure that this governance model has taken place. If you've got any strategies or thoughts on that.
I'm not the person to ask for that, frankly. I would be happy to listen to any suggestions on that score. I think we have a couple of folks in both research administration and on the IT side of it that do have a pretty good ear in senior management. So I think we're going to be pretty well positioned in that regard. But I think this is also one of those cases where your mileage may vary, and local conditions, you have to tailor how you approach that to fit your relationship with your management.
Great. All right. Well, I thank you for that's there's a lot of that going on in this whole thing. I thank you for that, and I think with that we'll turn it over to pillar 2. And the second pillar of this is the financials and costs, which Cal has alluded to in the roles. There's certainly a key role in this, because without the money to do these things, you kind of are stuck with looking at failure. So Hank Glaspie from University of Central Florida is going to talk to us a bit about the financials and cost pillar. Hank, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Can I share my screen? Is that fine?
I just shared. Can you see it on the screen? If you want to share screen, you can, but
Yes, that's kind of an incomplete doc, so I did more of a presentation if that was.
okay, sure. Yeah. You share.
All right, thanks. Can everyone see that?
Looks good.
We're good? Okay. Thank you. So the pillar that I'm going to present today, and the one that I've been working on really since the beginning of this series, has been the financials and costs. And you're going to have to excuse my proximity bias. My position is the risk and compliance program manager. And so this is like my baby at my institution, the University of Central Florida. So if it seems like I'm speaking to familiarity or I might have some sort of blinders on, please excuse me. I really value everyone else's opinion in this because, you know, I sometimes I can't see things that are behind me or that are not in my peripherals. So all input and feedback is well accepted. One of the things I noticed is that the financials and costs reaches out to all the different pillars because all the different pillars have a cost that are associated to them. And so, you know, I try to not bleed over in the content in the areas that I was working on into a lot of the other areas, but allow them to use them as supplement to the financials and costs because they do inform that. And you'll see that as I move later in the presentation. So obviously ownership and governance, one of the pillars is ownerships and roles. We talked a little bit about senior level involvement. That's extremely important, especially in your financials and costs. You need those people on a senior level. I'm lucky in I have senior leadership that are the VP of risk and compliance, the VP of research, and the VP of IT, the CIO, who have my back in this program. And they're able to speak to our board and other senior leadership about things that are needed in the budget cycle. They help me get my policies through on a university level. We happen to be a decentralized IT environment. We're doing a little bit of centralization currently, but we are decentralized. And so I need that higher level governance to be able to make sure my program is successful. And also in strategic planning, you don't want to be left out. As the university develops the strategic plan and moves forward, you want to make sure that you're, taken care of in that aspect. And this type of research is put in front. We have a new president. One of his initiatives is to expand our research enterprise, and one of the ways we do it at our particular university is through export control DoD CUI research. And we have a pretty decent dollar amount of that, and we want to grow it. And so we need to be at the forefront of strategic planning on a senior level. But also at a lower level, more boots on the ground, as we use the term at UCF, we need a group, and that I'm a part of that group and I lead that group, which has more of a working knowledge of the research administration, the IT support, the information security. And we really took it to heart what's out there, to figure out what's out there, what are the conditions, what are the resources that we can use, what's available to us, and then use that to push that upwards to inform our senior leadership of our budget needs. So that ownership and governance that we were talking about is extremely important. And what we did is we built a roadmap. And there was a question that was asked, how do you get your senior leadership to understand? Well, we built this roadmap where, I did a presentation with Eric Duman, so he's seen this slide before, but I borrowed it from this and where we are going, where we've been and where we're going. And we also try to use this to inform our senior leadership where we are on the road. Right now, we're in between the November 30th and the 2021-25. We are currently going through an exercise with the third party for what we call a pre-CMMC assessment. And so this kind of goes into another one of our pillars, that we talk about which is auditing and scoping. But we did that work. We're doing a pre-assessment because we want to know where we currently stand and what we have to do as we move forward to a time period where we will meet CMMC assessment. But one of the first things we did in order to build a financial model, and results may vary and steps may vary. Again, like I said, this is my proximity bias, but we gathered the evidence. We started in January 1st, 2018, when that mandate came from the federal government, when we were supposed to start being compliant with this type of research. And we looked to see how much of it we do, how much of it is a part of our entire research enterprise. And that informed us a lot. Was it a big chunk? Was it a small chunk? Should we be doing this at all? What's the return on investment of the effort that they're going to put forward in funding my position and any of the other resources that will have to support it? We also, like I said, we went contract by contract, research center by research center, PI by PI to find out, where do we have subject matter expertise? Where do we have IT that might be already meeting that compliance, and then we can use their expertise to help us spread compliance across the university as a whole. And we also worked with our research administration, pre-award proposals, contracts and grants to see what was coming. What type of proposals are being submitted? What are we looking at in the horizon? What do we expect? Do we expect more of this type of research? Are we hiring more faculty that do this type of research? So that other evidence gathering was extremely important to us. And then of course you have to examine the evidence, so based upon what you have, what are you trying to achieve? What is your current state of compliance? Are you trying to achieve CMMC level 3? Where are you in CMMC level 1? I mean, that's going to probably be on all basic DoD contracts that you get, regardless of whether or not you are generating, receiving, transmitting, handling CUI. You're going to have to meet level 1 or level 2. It'll probably be stamped in your contracts in the future. So what's your current state? And what are those cost drivers that are help building your financial model? What are you looking at personnel wise in these research centers? Hardware, is it all aging, old hardware? Do you have a bunch of lasers or thermometers or whatever type of research that you do that can only run on Windows XP or Windows 7? You're going to have a hard time meeting compliance if that's the case. Where's your software? Like I mentioned, we're decentralized IT. And so licensing and software is all over the place for us. But where are you in your software and supporting applications, and how do you plan to use, or are you currently using cloud services or managed service providers? That could also inform your cost model. And again, like I mentioned before, it's that 800-pound elephant in the room is decentralized or distributed versus centralized IT, and how are you going to make that work across all your different research centers and your research focus in the enterprise? And then from there, you try to find intersections. It keeps coming up, centralized versus decentralized IT. If you're centralized, how are you spreading? Are you spreading yourselves too thin? If you're decentralized, how are you going to use those resources to act in concert? Are you going to have on-premise enclaves? How many? One, many of them. How are you going to get them certified? Cloud enclaves, the same way. How are you going to maintain compliance? Are you really using your vendors and business partners well? Are you getting efficient use out of them? Or do you need more? Do you need that help? And really, how are you going to recover costs? This is the one of the hardest things I found in the work that I do is how are we going to get in front of these proposals to make sure that the budget is there for the future. And lastly, I say the challenges, including but not limited to, because again, you don't know what you don't know, and you can't see all the time what's behind you. So, I'm looking at sustainability, your project budgeting. Like I mentioned before, can you get in front of that for the proposals? use of existing resources, licensing, I again spoke on that on a centralized or decentralized, or even how you set up your licensing model at your institution. Physical security, that's a problem that we have. We have dual use spaces that do CUI research and also academic and teaching research. How are you going to separate that to make sure that you have a compliant work area? And remote work, how do you account for that, especially in this time and in this season? And maybe you're a university like us that has campuses spread out in, sometimes 45 minutes or more away. How are you going to make sure that you support and handle those challenges? So that is my presentation, but these are some of the things that I'm highlighting in the paper that I'm helping to write, and some of the challenges that and the things that we need to do to move forward on a better financial and costing model. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I've got a question for you. I'm still looking to see if we get any in a general channel, but I know, having come from a decentralized background in a previous position, that a lot of times in a decentralized environment, you're not really looking at necessarily the whole idea of identifying costs. Do you have any tips for people who haven't done any cost justification in the past as to how they wrap their hands around beginning that process and figuring out what these new incremental costs are going to be?
I think really start small. Again, to me, that inventory is everything, because you have to know what you have, right? Before you can decide what you want to spend. So how much research are you trying to protect? And if you were to protect it, how big of an enclave, or how many enclaves, or how is that going to set up where you move forward? Can you handle it with a simple cloud service or a simple on-premise enclave and then expand from there? That's what we used to really start our budgeting model. We took what we knew and we said, what will we need to make sure that we're compliant in what we currently have? And then what can we do to make that scalable in case our mission is to take on more research? So what will that mean? So, and then you have to make sure your senior leadership understands that you can only speak about what you know at the current time. We're in our third or fourth iteration of the budget. We came out with an original one. We said, oops, we found out some more information. We need to pivot. And that's what we were able to do. And, I'm blessed to have the leadership that I have that really worked with me on that. I hope everyone else has the same.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions. I'm not sure where we stand on time, but if I'm not mistaken, our colleague Eric Dumans is here to introduce Pillar 3.
So the third pillar is about training, and Kathy is going to present. Do you want to share your screen, Kathy, or?
Kathy's going to share her own, yeah.
Hi, yeah, I can share.
Yes, please go ahead then.
Okay. How's that? Can we see?
Yes.
Okay. Still good?
Actually, now you're in presenter mode. Can you flip your screen to the other one?
Oh, go back. Is it better like that?
I think this is better, or flip your sharing to share the other screen.
Oh, okay. Well, how about, can you see this well enough? Is that good?
Yeah, this is fine.
Okay. We'll just go with this. Sorry. Yeah, Kathy Riley, I'm from Clemson University. So training and education. And as we've been hearing from everyone, there's like a whole group of people that are involved with these research projects and the controlled information. So, and on this slide, I just said, the training objectives, who and what. And it occurred to me that you could touch upon just the CUI awareness with everyone at your institution. Maybe just at a compliance level, that they're aware of this as another compliance requirement. the research team, the researchers, so of course they need to be aware, but I found that this is a new thing to a lot of people, and they don't even know that, oh, that's in my in the agreement, then, and I have to meet the NIST 800-171, all the requirements. So they definitely need the information up front. Contract officers, grant administrators, your IT support folks, that they're aware that on these particular systems, we have to do more compliance. Export control and research security, of course, and then internal audit, get them involved to help, as it was mentioned, and other ownership and roles that they can help with the assessments on the back end. So the who and the what, and then how do you gather information? I also have a list of links that people have shared on what they've been using, but it's kind of interesting trying to figure out what do you need to do for your institution and how do you get the right information out there. So partner with internal and external stakeholders. You need to refresh your material as your policies and procedures change. You need to evaluate the effectiveness of the training, maybe because you present the information on any sort of training that you do, and how is that coming across to your audience? Are we getting the right message across? Determine how to develop the basic guidelines for CUI markings that include that in your training. Provide the technical training to assist with the audits and assessments. So, here's our security controls, and what does that mean though to researchers that might not be as technical? So what does it mean that they need to do? And then you provide the tools to assist with the assessments. So there's some web links in the full documentation that can be shared on where to find some of this information. The training resources, and in the full document, a lot of people shared their links to actually where you can go find this information. So we can use the EDUCAUSE library, the National Archives and Records Administration, their CUI registry, and they've got some information. The DoD Center for Development of Security Excellence, several people recommended that. And a lot of good training out there, but some of it is rather lengthy. And can you get people to go through all of it? Should you try to customize what you're doing and just base the training on each audience, on what they need? That's a challenge for each institution, I think, to figure out. But we can, I feel like some information needs to go to everyone, and then specialize when it comes to roles and responsibilities. The Cybersecurity Collaboration Center webinars, again, DoD training, and then the information that we can share between institutions. And that's what we're doing here. And we can continue to maybe share what we've developed at each institution and say, that's really great. Let me use that here. So how do you deliver the training? If you have, oh wait, that's on another slide. Sorry, I got sidetracked, but deliver the training. So IRB meetings was suggested, new faculty orientation, newsletters, information security awareness programs. You can take any opportunity you can find, but the in-person training, for sure, that can enhance the effectiveness beyond the online training that you might be able to have. Online training is good in that, tracking it, and people can do it when they have an opportunity. So just supplement that with the in-person training. Include the CUI with information security awareness and other compliance training. I'm definitely going to take that opportunity at Clemson University to do it that way. And then also consider augmenting the annual training with some just-in-time training. So a new project comes along and there's a big group of people involved and that have not been involved in CUI and other controlled research in the past. So if you can provide ways to get that information to them as needed. So some of the peer practices and challenges, we all try to collect this information for each of these pillars. So here's where I was going to go with the learning management system. If you have a learning management system, I feel like that's a great opportunity to put your online training out there. You can track your enrollments and completions. You can put deadlines out there. You can send reminders on getting the training completed. You can develop customized courses using the government website information. That's kind of what we've done at Clemson University. We've done that as well as using a third party to help develop the training because we're starting from scratch. Establish an annual requirement to do the online training. Like anything, you probably need refresher courses, again, as the information changes, but then also just to remind them, here's what you need to be doing. There's semesterly workshops that could help with kind of like the just-in-time training. And I think University of Hawaii, they reminded about including guest speakers, which is an excellent suggestion. If you can get a hold of some of the people from DCSA, DHS, FBI. Include the research information in a data governance program. And again, engage your third-party subject matter experts, as opportunities present themselves, and to use the CDESE CUI training. Those are some of the peer practices that everyone shared. And the challenges probably it's going to be similar across all the pillars, but that the researchers need to understand these new regulations and their role, that you have resource limitations. I think this is, again, funding for to do training even, but certainly funding for developing your systems and people to help manage all of this. Tracking the assets and controls implemented, and so you can put that in your training. What are we telling people, like what systems can they use? Business and functional owner awareness, identifying and tracking who requires the training. So again, if you have an online system, that's going to be really helpful. The appropriate content for the role-based training. I feel like that's an important one, because you can give the overall awareness, but then what does it mean to each individual? And then align the policies, procedures, practices, controls, everything in alignment, so you don't confuse people, because you tell them something in a policy in one place, but then you tell them something else in practice. So those are just some of the challenges.
Very good. Let me see, there are no questions, but I have a particular question on setting up the training program. There is a broad, we of course focus on CUI because CUI seems to be driving, but there are in the daily news lots of security concerns, and there's lots of other organizations that you deal with who are much more concerned about security, and all kinds of contracts and agreements ask for more. So how have you considered the broadening of the security training?
Yeah, so is that somewhat where you have to target it on, maybe per project, but then also the roles and responsibilities of what someone's doing, or Eric, that's maybe more project based on who needs what?
Yes, that's a very good point. Different projects will need different additional training, but there are general training messages that can be sent to everybody. And I think you covered it. You start from the top, and you can bring security awareness to the entire institution, to every student, every faculty member, every staff member, and make the context much broader than CUI. One of the things that I have found is that often when you bring up Department of Defense contracts or CUI contract people say, oh, I don't deal with that. And then they immediately zone out. But security is actually much more pervasive. So often we should start at this broader outline. There is a question here. Oh, okay, no, there's another thing.
Yeah, yeah. It occurred to me recently that it's another compliance effort, and so people know about FERPA at institutions, and a lot of people know about HIPAA. But then, so let's put the controlled CDI, CUI, you know, whatever is appropriate information out there as well.
Yeah, there is a question from Hank. How are you tracking the different types of training from IRB to export control to CUI to security awareness that may be required by all kinds of departments?
So at Clemson University, I'm really leveraging the learning management system, and then I have to rely on different groups to tell me who needs the training, though. You know, so have to be in communication with these different areas to make sure we're enrolling the appropriate people and developing the appropriate courses.
Yeah, actually, I think there's no one size fits all solution to this. This is sort of part of your program. If you create a program, you have to pay attention to the variety in training. And there are some that are basic that everybody benefits from. And then there are others that become specialized. And you certainly do not want to have a one training that fits all, because it would be too long and people wouldn't take it. Actually,
Right.
there are several people who are providing answers on what they are doing at different places. But I think from a historical point of view, there are some pockets that have traditionally been dealing with restricted data, like IRB and the Department of Defense. And I think what's happening now is all of it is becoming more in everybody's awareness. And so what you need to do for the training part is to leverage what these people have already built and maybe augment them and connect them. And that would be then the responsibility of the central or overarching compliance program that we are trying to help guide with this series of workshops and this information. So I think we should go on to our next speaker. The next pillar is auditing. And Anurag Shankar from Indiana University is going to give us an overview of that. Yep, we can see your slides.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Tim. I've done compliance for a long time, 15 years or so, responsible for making sure that our central systems are HIPAA compliant, and more recently, the DoD stuff. And I think a fair statement is the era of self-asserted compliance is ending with CMMC. You know, done FISMA and things like that, where you have to have a third-party assessment, but now we're going to have a certification. The other interesting thing was in our affinity group, I saw that it was the smallest affinity group, I think, and whether that was because the auditing was the least favorite of the pillars, or whether the other pillars were far more interesting. But in any case, so in our group, we identified 4 areas in auditing. The first one was that we identify ownership, basically who on campus should own the auditing program, sort of overall auditing program. Second one was managing the audit process itself. What are the strategies for how best to do the audit or prepare for the audit? And the third one was the gathering and organizing evidence. So basically optimizing data gathering and artifacts and that sort of thing. And finally, leverage and empower the community in this particular context. Next slide. So the questions to ask when you, go back. When you identify ownership of the process, and we've talked about ownership before, is this is a little more targeted. So the question is, who should lead the overall auditing effort on campus? You know, it could be the security office, compliance, or it could even be the Office of Research or sponsored research or research administration, whatever it's called at your campus, with perhaps ISO and compliance as its agents or liaisons. And the second one is once there are, once like pre-audit or audits find some gaps, who makes the remediation decisions? Again, is it, ISO or compliance and so forth? These are questions that are going to vary from campus to campus. So this is an area to start with. Next slide. Managing the audit process is a fairly important part of it. Scoping is going to come later, but the first strategy to use is to limit scope to minimize the auditing effort. This is a very excellent strategy to use by, for example, segmentation in cloud enclaves, or even carefully limiting the authorization boundary, which basically what's in scope. Definitely create a central artifact repository where all the documents and any other things that you have to use to prove your compliance or due diligence go. Automation is key. Automate as much as possible. There are some challenges there, but certainly use what you have, scripts or whatever. Use pre-audits. These are extremely useful, especially if you can convince your internal audit to do these pre-audits for you, to prep for a real audit, and use it basically as an opportunity to update your documentation and really create those artifacts necessary for the actual audit. Bake in auditing into solutions that you build, especially centrally, so that you have some control there, and so you can sort of pre-plan as to how auditing would be done, how you create artifacts and things like that. Also, I think it's time to shift toward more continuous monitoring, and we normally think in terms of annual audits, and I think they're still okay, but especially as you grow toward more strict compliance regimes such as FISMA and so forth, hopefully you never have to deal with it, but the continuous auditing is continuous monitoring is becoming a increasingly common requirement, and that means that you're not doing it just annually, but also have different activities you do monthly or even daily and things like that, like analyzing logs and so forth. And the last one was that you need to budget for pre-assessments, particularly with CMMC, because while you've heard that CMMC costs can be added to your budget, it's only the certification cost, not any pre-assessment costs. And generally speaking, folks who don't have the experience in-house, they have to hire people to come in and help them. So that's something to keep in mind. Next slide. Gather and organize the evidence. This is a tough one. The key thing that you want to do here is to make external audits as easy for auditors as possible. This creates a lot of goodwill. It's something I've personally experienced. And the way to do this is that you use the same auditing formula that the auditors use. So for example, if you're preparing for DFARS audits, well, CMMC audits, I guess, then you would use, for example, list 800-171A. If you are preparing for a HIPAA audit, then you would use the OCR audit protocol. Also, to be clear about where the controls are applied and how audited, this is information that would be probably required during interviews and so forth, so you have to be very clear about that. Standardized documentation, as to the extent possible. CMMC, this may be helpful, it may not be helpful in the end, because they're going to do interviews and there's going to be a lot of focus on that, but certainly it helps to have some standard documentation, use some templates that are institutional, so to speak. It's going to be very helpful to them and to you to create like indexes or places where you can easily point to artifacts with links. So in your repository, there's some place where you can, for a particular audit, everything is in one page, on one page. That's going to be extremely helpful. And finally, if you have researchers doing data security plans or data security plans, I guess the compliance plans, then add that to the repository as well, so they're easily available. Next slide. And finally, of course, use and give back to the community. And one thing that you can explore are peer assessments. So for example, if you can convince a peer to come in and take a look at it, your program, even just, as a cursory look, that's useful. Of course, you can hire RenISAC or someone to actually do the assessment, also peer assessments. Youth contribute to the community forums, such as Higher Ed CUI that we hopefully you are on. Also, RenISAC and EDUCAUSE have started CUI specific forums, so those are be sure to join those and contribute there. I mean, anything that you have done or any ideas you have are going to be very useful. It's going to be a changing landscape, so this is going to be important. Share your own auditing experiences and encourage others to share auditing experiences. This is very important because this is something that you can use to then hold agencies or auditors to kind of a same standard. And this is a big concern with CMMC because we have external people coming in to do these audits. If you have creating templates, please share them. It's very, very useful to do that. And of course, we want to speak with a single voice so we can influence sponsor. For example, if they start imposing some crazy, insane types of requirement on us that they might be imposing upon, DOD and also. All right, couple more slides very quickly. So next slide. We also identified peer practices. People are building cloud enclaves again to limit scope. They're gathering data from researchers and IT folks and departments, creating documents, system security plans, inventories, personnel risk lists. Some are using 853 as their best standard and mapping to other compliance regimes to sort of, have one thing to rule them all. Automated scripts, a CERT CSET tool for automation, using SIEM and vulnerability scanning to check control sets. And the last slide, please. Challenger silos on campus, if you're doing it for lots of different departments and so forth that have their own systems, and the silos are going to be difficult to handle until you have some central power to impose upon them. There's a lack of standardization. There's no standard checklists to do any auditing. There's a great lack of auditing tools themselves. Controls interpretation. This is going to be another pillar coming in. That's a big deal. And then lastly, the legacy technologies, how you audit things like lab machines and so forth. So with that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Anurag. So can you clarify the distinction between auditing and assessing?
Aha, that's it. That's something it took me a long time to learn that myself. So auditing is a process where they come in and they say, give me your documentation, and they will hold you to it. They will check to see whether you're doing what you say you're doing. So that's an audit. That's internal audit. Explain that to me. And assessment could be any number of things, but basically someone comes in and checks to see, for example, if you're doing a compliance, if you're compliant or any aspect of your security program. So it's a little fuzzier, but generally speaking, you'd come in and they often would help you. For example, I think of more assessment as someone basically helping you by doing this assessment, or you're hiring someone to come and do an assessment. Whereas an audit is this hardcore thing that you have to just deal with. Yeah, there you Hank is
yes.
right. Yes. And audit is also a type of an assessment, but an assessment is definitely doesn't have to be. It can be an audit, but doesn't have to be.
So going forward, from an auditing preparation point of view, when you do a pre-audit, how involved do you think they should be to be effective?
How involved should who be?
Yeah, like if you pointed out that it's good to do a pre-audit. So you want to involve maybe your Office of Internal Audit, but what do you think is sort of a good standard effort without it making like a full-sized audit anyway? I mean, you look at a fraction of the amount of work, or you look at some of the evidence, or what are your guidelines to sort of scope the amount of work you're willing to put in a pre-audit?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. In fact, I think you already sort of answered it, which is to, yeah, take some part of it. I mean, if you have a central program, it's actually not a bad idea to have them audit that program itself. But to do a pre-audit of the kind of audit that you're preparing for, basically like a CMMC audit, yeah, you may pick up a system or two or something like that, or a department, or maybe even a central system, and basically just go over that. So, especially things that are more under your control centrally, that would probably be the most efficient way of doing it. Or find some people on campus that are, there are some IT professionals or researchers even. Researchers, or maybe not so much, but maybe you can find some that will actually be happy to help you with this process, especially if they are the ones who are having to, they have the DoD contracts, for example. So, yeah.
Okay. All right, well, let's go on to the next pillar then.
All right, that's me getting to introduce the Clarity on Controls pillar. And this will be led by Ronnie Wilkinson and Will Drake.
Thank you. Will and I did not coordinate this, so forgive us. And we also did not do PowerPoint slides. The time got away from us. So clarity on controls, for us, this pillar distills down to an angst over whether your implementation of a particular control is going to pass muster during an expensive audit. And you don't want to have to hire a second opinion or re-implement. So it's like a lot of pressure to get it right the first time. And so we've kind of come up with some ways to think about this that reframes this problem, and hopefully will give people more confidence in what's going on. So, and our recommendations is we need to manage risk and address compliance in efficient and effective ways holistically. So, and making sure we're doing everything risk-based. First of all, we're wondering, what is it that most people want to get clarity on? So there's the specific controls themselves. The controls are written very generally because, you want that flexibility in implementation, because you don't know what the specific environment is going to be that these need to be realized in. And so if you're approaching it through a holistic layered approach, and you're doing this as in a risk-based way, you don't want to take these controls out of context of a complete security program. You don't want to try to be understanding them in isolation, because when you start looking at them individually in isolation, they begin to feel a lot less clear, and you kind of lose the resolution of all the controls that all the controls provide together for your implementation. So specific controls, a lot of people have questions about clarity on that. Other issues are reporting. So in the ideal world, which I don't know how many of you are working in that ideal world, but we are not. But in the ideal world, you would have thought about reporting for each of the control during implementation. You would have designed it in, you would have implemented whatever reporting you needed to survive your audits or your assessments at that time. So as I understand, a lot of people were, just focused on getting the NIST 800-171 controls finished, getting them implemented, and they were not thinking about how is this going to translate to a CMMC assessment in the future. So a lot of times where people are having to go back in and figure out how to do controls on something that has already been implemented, trying to do reporting on something that's already been implemented. So, and what we want is, we want to make sure that the reporting we have is showing that each control's been fully implemented, it's fully functional, or it's working as intended. So, and then the last area of concern that we explored was the uncertainty introduced by having to work within or implement several different frameworks. So there's a lot of people that are doing different kinds of secure research, whether it is HIPAA or CUI or whatever. In the ideal world, there's like one framework and this is how you be secure, and you only have to worry about that one thing. But really, if you want to be efficient, you want to try to tackle all of your frameworks in one security program, and then worry about assessing whether you're secure and doing different reports. So what we're recommending is people adopt a risk-based holistic approach. So instead of trying to figure out what the perfect clarity is on individual controls, we're going to recommend you do this holistically as a security program. So the correct way to interpret a control in that case is in the context of risk. So the question you want to ask is, in what form should the control be implemented so it addresses the risk of not having that control in place while keeping the research mission front and center? So you put this question, when you start having uncertainty about the clarity of control, you put this question in place and you try to answer this question. And so sometimes, you might not have, the example was that I think Carnegie Mellon provided was that they have argued in a DoD assessment based on their interpretation of controls that, it was acceptable to, I'm sorry, my phone's going off. It was acceptable to approach controls through risk-based assessment and layers of other controls as well. You didn't have to have FIPS, say 140-2 validated cryptography on everything, but only if that was the only thing protecting the data. But you also didn't have to have guards and guns protecting it, So one of the other areas that we recommend is collaboration, and I think we just heard this in the auditing. So there's strength in collaboration and other points of view, and quite honestly, higher ed is pretty good at that. But also there's going to be experts or authorities with your own institution, general counsel, contract officers, all of those kinds of people, community resources such as other universities. And if you have to hire outside consultants because you don't have the subject matter expertise you need, feel free to do that. All of those things help when you have a lot of people. And then once you've learned from others, also become a community resource. Whatever you learn, share it back to the community, and that strengthens all of us. So managing compliance efficiently. We want to do this as efficiently as possible because that's going to cost less money, cost less people time, all of that. So if you have different regimes that you have to meet, say HIPAA and CUI, combine them into one security program and then do assess once, report many. So assess once on that whole security program and then base your reports individually towards each of those frameworks that you need to report on. And that's going to be much more efficient in the future. Don't forget your audience when you're striving for efficiencies. So, we probably talk security controls all day. We understand this stuff in general, but a lot of faculties in research, that is not their thing. They're going to need help understanding requirements. And so distilling it down to easily understood checklists that are relevant to them and take into account, local policies or resources already implemented for them in the frameworks, those kinds of things help. It makes them more efficient and they can concentrate on the research, not on setting up the environment to do the research. And I know centralized versus decentralized has come up a lot in the conversations and presentations today, but these things can really drive efficiencies in your implementation or inhibit them. So you need to consider these when you're figuring out your governance, your scope, but also this is part of figuring out who's responsible for interpreting the various controls, especially in a decentralized environment. If you have one group interpreting a control this way, another group interpreting that way, possibly your assessment process is not going to be as smooth as you would like. So even within a decentralized environment, perhaps appointing or creating a group that helps people with understanding what the interpretation should be, that would be the way to go. Oh, I'm getting hearts. So our call to action is we think we need to have a seat at the table, somebody to evangelize on behalf of higher ed when it comes to CMMC, get ahead of the rules and regulations and voice our perspectives proactively. And also we believe that leveraging the community is going to be big. And we recommend establishing a permanent virtual home for this community with the resources around the CUI, the security controls, compliance, repositories where people can post their implementation or their interpretations, and maybe the audit outcomes of what has happened during audits or assessments. And now that I know that assessments are different, perhaps I need to go write that in here. And sharing that back to the community of what worked and what did not. And that is essentially what we have written for you. Do we have any questions?
Before I jump into questions, Ronnie, you are creating an absolutely perfect segue for why we should stick around to the last slide or so. There are some great news coming up. So let's see. One that came up in the chat, and it's not quite just a specific control, but how does one start looking at how your conservative versus liberal choices of your interpretation? So how do you know how right-sized some of those become? I suppose once you get, whether it's audited and they're like, yep, you clear fine. Were you overly conservative or not?
Well, I have started, so in ours, I have been overly conservative, but then I keep reading and seeing what other people are doing and reaching out and speaking to other people. And then they'll ask a question, well, but did you do this over here with these controls? And I'm like, of course we did that. They're like, well, that mitigates this. You don't have to be quite so strict. So I really think that this is where community and collaboration comes in handy, having people to talk to about this until such a time as we get through the assessments and we have hard data to say, okay, this did not pass muster. We need to go ahead and if you didn't do these things in conjunction with each other, you need to go ahead and make sure you absolutely do this on this control. Until we have that data and more of us have been through this, I'm not sure that we have that answer yet, do we? But I like being able to make a strong risk-based case in terms of, here's what I thought. This is the risk. If you understand the risk that your controls are supposed to be mitigating, here's the risk. And yes, this doesn't completely address it, but I've coupled it with this, this, and this, and therefore the risk is minimal or completely gone. And so I like thinking in terms of what am I protecting against when I'm making these stories or these cases.
Were there other questions that we should be pulling out? I didn't see too many in the chat.
And chime in, Will, if I'm speaking wrong for us.
Nope, you are doing great. I appreciate it. I will, while we're waiting for more questions, I'll bring up how important it is to kind of, what we did at Indiana University, essentially appointed a central group that does a lot of the collaboration. Anurag and I have a team where we work directly with all the shareholders that are involved in security and compliance at IU. And so not only is it very important that some group is gaining all of this clarity on controls, but we have an effective way to, an effective means to push that out to researchers who are most affected by it. So we've got essentially a support group who can work directly with researchers if they have questions on compliance and that kind of stuff. And it really helps avoiding the situation I refer to as implementation silos, where you've got all these different departments and all these different research projects who have looked at the controls in their compliance stuff or their data use agreements, and they say, this is how we're going to implement it, and not involving the institution as a whole, where we have a centralized group that can do that interpretation and then push it out from central to make sure everybody's on par.
I like that you call it a support group.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I believe, thank you. We will move on to the next pillar. And for our final pillar, we get scoping. And that one has been certainly a lengthy conversation as well. So I'm eager to hear this summary. Oh, hey, shush. From Kyle Smith.
Well, I assure you your dog's much more interesting than what I'm about to say, but I'll give it my best shot. So as far as scoping, I mean, the introduction of it, it's a key component of any compliance program, and really it kind of gives you a context for what's going to be in scope for your environment. Basically, balancing cost, risk, and institutional mission, making sure that you're accounting for, how the controls are going to apply to your institution, what kind of equipment is going to be involved, and what kind of personnel are going to be involved. The security boundary overall should quantify where systems and resources store, process, and transmit the data that is involved. And, the data also that's in the contractual responsibility and accountability of the institution, and based on whatever regulations are involved. So one thing that it kind of naturally came to is larger subsections. So to start off with, we had addressing stakeholder requirements. So basically making sure that you have the requirements of the researchers, of leadership, of those that are running the technology, and making sure everybody's got a complete understanding and a unified language about what's required, because that's going to be the main part of the discussion, and it kind of ties into a lot of other the other pillars. And it essentially, each of the stakeholders need to have a good understanding of their own personal boundaries, and not just the boundaries of what's in play. Can we scroll down a little bit? Yeah, so put together just a few bullet points based on some tools that could help with that discussion. So kind of like what we're doing now, working with other institutions to see if they have similar approaches, have serious discussions with the stakeholders about whether it's even feasible to comply with the regulation at hand. You may run into a situation where, just quite frankly, the controls are too strict to be able to comply with that regulation, and it's just not worth it. It'll just be too pricey to comply. And then asking questions of leadership to confirm whether they're willing to invest in a team necessary to guide the community and act as that governance, risk, and compliance role, and to catalog those risks. Because if you don't have a team that has expertise in that, there comes a time when things get a little bit disjointed. Everybody has their own individual ideas of what compliance means and what scoping means, and things can get a bit muddled. And then when you've completed stakeholder discussions, you'll need to sort the stakeholder requirements and the regulation requirements, perform a gap analysis against those, and then discuss with researchers the various regulations that the projects require. Can we scroll down a little bit? And then you group together those demands and the solutions of the institution to meet those requirements. And then based on the responses of everything before, there should be a holistic discussion of the approach of an enclave where researchers can work on their projects, and the regulations met by the implementation or otherwise. The next step is to confirm the workflow and the data boundary. So, now that you've got the requirements, you now have the long and short of what you're going to need to see in the workflow and the boundaries. So, going along those lines, so can we scroll down a little bit? There we go. So basically, the next step is to map out all the different boundaries based on everybody's understanding of what the scope is going to be. So, you've got your researcher workflows, you've got your leadership workflows, you've got, audit workflows, all that kind of thing. Kind of put them into swim lanes and kind of see where there are commonalities, see who owns which part of the process, and then get a better idea of the flow. And once the workflow and parties have been accepted by leadership, the next step is to make sure the workflow is formatted in a way that's easily added to your system security plan template, ideally, if you're using multiple system security plans or your overall SSP for your institution, primarily because if an auditor looks at it, they'll be able to see who owns what. Can we scroll down a bit? All right, so then the other part is, so, you've got your workflow internally, and then there's also the third-party involvement aspect. So you can go all day long and talk about the workflow of the individuals in your institution, whether it's HR, whether it's researchers, whether it's GRC team, everything, but you're gonna have software that involves third parties. So to take that into account with scoping, especially with the aspect that CMMC is a lot more specific about the fact that a system also includes, your cloud services and things like that, even though the DFAR 7012 clause says that they have to be FedRAMP moderate or better with, the ability to report based on DFAR C3G. That should really be taken care of in your contracts as much as possible based on the regulations that are involved. So essentially just trying to make sure that you're covered from a contractual standpoint so that you can show those to auditors, unless you might have to go into a more granular plan if it's for some reason not in the contract, but then you don't have the guarantees necessary. So then the potential practices to consider. What I did here is I kind of pulled together the various practices of scoping of what was brought up between all of our conversations. Really, scoping is, and excuse the non-technical term, but it's a squishy matter. Scoping is going to be different for every institution. It's going to be differently approached based on the types of research that happen, the types of data that is stored, processed, and transmitted, all kinds of different factors. So realistically, this section is to talk about the different practices to consider in terms of how things apply to you, and just to provide some ideas. Like involving leadership as soon as possible. I mean, that would be a big one, but it just kind of depends. If action is required in the short term with the regulation, consider a tiered approach. That's kind of what we did at Tech, as a for example, where you kind of go project to project until you get some acceptance of the process, and then you can move to grander approaches once you have a little bit more acceptance. I'll skip down to a few more. Bringing in those that can provide outside or impartial opinion, like the REN-ISAC group, or this team here, for example. Determine complete list of services and solutions. Just all kinds of down that list. And I mean, this is not at all meant to be exhaustive, just to provide some ideas, purely because scoping is a larger conversation that needs to happen. The challenges you may face section is somewhat similar, but it wasn't put into a bulleted form because it really was a little bit easier to turn into a holistic conversation in terms of the fact that higher education institutions don't operate like an enterprise, how they can act, somewhat like fiefdoms, and there are a lot of different disjointed areas on campus. Sometimes contracts require compliance when the hardware for the project hasn't been purchased, and researchers sometimes can feel like they can accomplish objectives with their personal equipment, which isn't always the case. Can we scroll down a little bit more? I think that pretty much covered it, but yeah, and then scoping responsibility, that can be a hard thing to consider as well, because there will be some people in your institution that feel that say internal audit is responsible for scoping, or IT is responsible for scoping, and things like that. So that's pretty much it. Open for any questions.
Thank you. Sounds like looks like some of the comments in the comments area are referring to what happens when the contract terms sort of just appear after the fact, or it's been approved and then scope changes a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah, and that comes into that workflow discussion in the context of, so if your Office of Sponsored Programs is reading those contracts, really they should be the ones that are owning that discussion and talking with the researchers and saying, well, you need to comply with this before we can release any more funds, or, before we can take any further action, you'll need to accomplish this or confirm this. And that's kind of where that scoping discussion comes in, where, if a contract didn't have it before and now it's forced regulation, then ultimately that's when, your workflow comes in and says, well, now this is a DFAR 7012 project and the contract has changed. We now follow this workflow. And that would be kind of how that would be approached in our case at Tech, but, also based on discussions, that's what it sounds like is similar to others.
I can agree. Hank points out the fundamental research exception is pretty much all of our friends.
Right.
But then it does not appear in CMMC.
Mm-hmm.
Did you in your group have any particular comments or in reading the material about the research exception, fundamental research exception, or on?
It was minimal, primarily in the context of there was a lot higher discussion of the fact that regulation is regulation. And, while there is a fundamental research exception in the context of DFAR 7012 and NIST 171 now, many other regulations are well past that, especially with, HIPAA security rule and, things like that. So it was more focused on the context of, if it's possible to bundle your regulations and hit more of those controls with a protected enclave or something like that, that might be a better approach, especially if you've already got something that nearly does meet or exceed the controls. That might be a better path. But the fundamental research exception, in my opinion, just speaking for myself, should be exactly that, an exception. While it's your friend in this case, it's a matter of, while it's great now, we can't always rely on exceptions, and they are just that, exceptions.
And maybe what you're saying is that its time is limited. Given the increasing concern, more and more people are going to say, well, even if you're going to publish your paper eventually, we don't want it to be stolen before your research is ready, and in that case, we don't want you to do any completely uncontrolled data storage for your research, no matter how fundamental it is.
Right.
Kyle, if you've got a chance, I've got one more to throw at you, and it's a question that knowing how things are, where today at Georgia Tech you were meeting with researchers and understanding that workflow after the contact is made. We're now getting into the CMMC realm, where even if we get a fundamental research set aside, which would be wonderful, you're now in a situation where you almost have to get that workflow understood and talk with that faculty member or research person prior to them even putting in the grant, or at least giving them some sort of, these are the things that are going to come into play if you're going to go make try and get money in this particular area. Are you all beginning to address that, thinking about it?
So the way that it's getting addressed right now is OSP put in a process, and you can see it on our site as well, that they require a security plan and the GRC team to assess the implementation of that security plan before funds are released. So it's not quite to the point of being before proposal, but it is going in that direction. With the context of CMMC requiring certification before somebody's even considered for that research, that's a much larger discussion. And it's a matter of, as we talked about, in this and previous pillars, of getting leadership involved with an understanding that, listen, researchers can propose all day long in the context of CMMC, and they won't even be considered if they don't have that certification. So, you know, they'll be coming back saying, well, how do I get it? And, you know, the institution needs to be ready to be able to answer that question. Any other questions I can answer?
Does not look like others appeared, and thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Carolyn, did you want to do full group plenary chat now? Did you have some topics? We have about 10 or 15 minutes for that, and then we're going to go to the survey.
Yeah, I certainly am curious right away on, I suppose, the general feedback from I suppose what you've just heard. And are you sharing out the screen?
Do you want me to, what does he want me to share? Do you want me to share something?
The presentation from the beginning.
Oh, right. Okay, sure.
Could start with 8.
Yep. Oh, hang on. Sorry, I got to find that. I closed that earlier by mistake. It'll just take me 1 second. I'll be back in there.
Actually, while we're waiting, there is one comment about what Kyle made, trying to get ahead at the proposal time. Clearly for CMMC, this will be required, but we see this with other agencies too, like NIH is now requiring that you make your data management fair, and you have to describe it correctly even before you submit your proposal, because it'll be considered part of the review. So I think this is a trend that is broader than just CUI to have to get into the security of your data at proposal time.
Okay. Nice.
So I'm sharing screen now, Carolyn.
Yes.
A couple of questions in there.
So I just wanted to open this up to the broader group and see what things resonated. Yeah, truly anything. Had some great conversations. Just go ahead and unmute yourself if.
I was going to say, do you want to make that open mic?
Yeah, people can unmute themselves, right?
Yes.
Okay. I suppose to put you on the spot, Hank, would you like to mention that Army email to the group? I think we'd get a laugh out of that.
Sure. I don't know. Ed, do you want to speak to that, or you want me to speak to it?
You can take it, Hank.
Okay. All right. So we have a research center that's literally at Kennedy Space Center, which is about 45 miles from our campus. And, you know, we had some projects that were tied to that research center that had the 7012 clause and some other clauses for export control. And due to the nature of the research, the actual nitty-gritty of what was going to be accomplished in execution of the contract, the PI and his group felt that that was an overreach, that the actual work they were doing should not meet the export control level, and that it should be deemed fundamental research. So they worked with our export control office, and they made a plea to get that negotiated out, which is a smart thing to do. And our export control office is great. They were ready and willing to do so. And they went to the sponsor first, and the sponsor said, no, go straight to the agency, which was the Army. And our export control director worked and got that. And asked for confirmation back from the Army. So the Army typed up a letter stating that the project and subsequent projects were going to be deemed as fundamental research, and talked a little bit about how they came to that understanding. And they stamped that document that I believe it was either PDF or Word, I can't remember, stamped it CUI and sent it via regular email. And so our export control person received it into our, our general academic university email, her university email account, and of course freaked out. And so that caused a huge problem as to, evaluating what we should do with the document now that we received it. And if, we went back and asked them, like, are you stamped this CUI? Are you sure this is CUI? And they came back and said, yep, we're sure this document we sent you is CUI that we sent over a regular email. But so that was a lot of the just one of the highlights of a lot of the fun that we have. But it just, spoke to, these controls and interpretations, and sometimes the agencies themselves don't even follow the rules that they set out in government regulation, but they expect us to. And at the same time, the power of possibly, currently being able to negotiate certain things out of your contract in trying to get a fundamental research exception.
Just to add to that, and I posted it in chat, but we had a subcontract. What is going on here? Can you guys hear this music?
No. I think it was fine. Anurag, continue.
Yeah, Anurag, we couldn't hear it, so. But you are muted now.
Sorry, yeah. I don't know what's going on with. Yeah, so just to add to Hank's thing, we had a subcontract with a DoD contractor, and in the paperwork they said, they said actually that the budget and a lot of contract information was itself CUI, and they had sent it to us over email, just regular email. So we actually had a meeting with their lawyers, and the lawyer said, well, DoD told us there might be problems sending this DFAR 7012 downstream, and actually we were unable to negotiate it out. So I'm actually quite curious to hear situations in which people have been able to negotiate it out, either here, or maybe you can type it in.
Well, we've had a situation where we've asked for clarification on the different clauses being in a contract, and we were told by one of the military agencies that it's a grant, so it can't be CUI. So we're still trying to find that in the regulations too, and that went all the way up to the director level, like senior executive service level. And they were adamant that since it was a grant, it can't be CUI. So.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a research SOC group that Mike Korn at UCSD runs, and I encourage people to join that too. But yeah, someone who was uploading scores to SPURS actually said that they talked to the SPURS support folks, and they didn't really have much of a clue as to the question he was asking. So it's sort of a general situation here.
So I suppose one of my questions for everyone is going to be, what way would work best for, I suppose, keeping these conversations going. We've obviously worked through a huge amount of material today, as well as over the last 6 months. And how would this best be provided or offered back to this community?
Well, I know we have a 171 group in EDUCAUSE. I know most of that focus has been to the Department of Education and, you know, as it deals with financial aid. But I think that, you know, that might be a place for a holistic discussion, not only on the research side, but also now on the academic side for these types of issues.
And thank you for that. You've just now put something on my radar for our agenda next week in that group. So I think that's an excellent suggestion, Hank.
Hey, Carolyn, this is Mike Parisi from High Trust. I am more than happy to volunteer, you know, our information sessions and education and all the resources that we have available. I know we've done some sessions with Eric and University of Florida in the past. We also have a new executive director that's focused specifically on CMMC, and we've also launched a regulatory assistance center. So any organization that is using a particular framework to show compliance with, well, it's 46 different regulations. One of those is 800-171. We provide assistance as part of that process in interpreting the regulation and also in quote unquote defending that. So I'm more than happy to offer that up to this group and talk about that further and provide any resources that we can to help the group.
Thank you. That sounds outstanding. And I suppose with that, with 10 minutes left, we'll try to get you out a couple minutes to potentially take a break before your next meeting. But all right, so can you go to the next slide? We have a quick feedback item, and I recognize if I let you guys leave without doing this, then I never hear about it. So here is the link in chat, as well as it's on the agenda. So at least please give comments to this. This has been a whole lot of work, and we'd like to make sure that we were addressing why you arrived to here.
Carolyn, you'd like people to take 2 minutes now and just click through and do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that'd be great if you could all click through. It's just a 2 minute thing, but we'd love to have your feedback from the organizing team perspective and the KI perspective. So
I suppose next slide then, while they're doing that one.
So don't go because there's more coming. I'll start a 2-minute timer and then we'll restart again in 2 minutes. So please do fill out that survey for us quickly. If you have any trouble, just speak up or put a note in the chat and we'll try to help you. Anne-Marie, do you have survey music that you like to play? She's a wonderful singer. If she doesn't have anything queued up, that's your cue, Anne-Marie.
All right. Probably aim on. It was a quick survey. You're still on mute, Tim.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thanks everyone for completing that survey. It helps us understand what we can do better.
All right, let's hit the
forward.
next one.
Okay.
I wanted to cover this one at a very quick level because this is what's going to come from these conversations and these presentations you saw today. So if there were things you heard that didn't reflect what your world looks like, please let us know. So I've given the link within the agenda. So the pillar presentation summary presentations, that link will bring you to a folder with all of these documents. And we're essentially giving you about a week of, if you didn't hear your world, please let us know. And then after that, we're going to start bringing that together into a cohesive paper. We'll start looking for a few volunteers after that to then probably do some editing, make sure it's in solid shape, but we're looking around mid-July in order to get this out to websites, this list, the Slack community. We'll get it out there and you can start bringing it back to your own institution. And so with that, I think that brings us to our last slide. Eric, do you want to start on this one?
Yes, so this series of workshops is part of an NSF-funded project that has come to an end. And Carolyn and I wrote a new proposal to continue this work, and it was just funded last week. And so in that proposal, we endeavor to create a community of practice, very much what we found in these last 6 workshops that we've been working together with all of you over a period of 7 or 8 months. And what we're going to try and do is to really solidify the fact finding, the materials, create a true communication mechanism, some training materials, work with partners like EDUCAUSE and HITRUST and Trusted CI and other NSF funded programs and other activities like CARC and CASC to try and build a community because we are identified now that there are challenges. Institutions are each working independently, and especially if you're a smaller institution with a small number of these grants that require it now, even though the number of grants that will require compliance is increasing. If it's a small amount of grants, then the institution may not have the resources to stand up a full program. And there is some kind of a quantum jump type thing to get going. You cannot start with just one dime. You usually have to have some people dedicating some amount of time, and it takes some effort. And so right now we're in a situation where institutions are sort of watching what else is new today and try to react to it. And we would like to have a shared repository where we can go and share the information so that everybody can be much more relaxed and more proactive and more targeted in dealing with these requirements. And so we are proposing some solutions, develop some training, which is one of the things that we discussed today as the pillars to get going. And I'll pass on to Carolyn to sort of tell us about the rest of what we want to do with this proposal and this project.
Well, this certainly has been impacted by Eric for about 3 years has been saying we don't have a voice at the table. And so we're working toward how to build toward that. And we recognize that until we are moving collectively with at least one voice, maybe one voice with a lot of sub bullets, but we weren't going to be heard. And I think this provides a great opportunity with more centralized training for each other. how to share some of the great things that we've developed within each institution, and done it multiple times probably over. So our main purpose here is to develop some of the representation in the strategic partnerships. So we saw that, as Eric mentioned, a lot of those different community groups that are also, I suppose, aligned, but there is no group that fits everyone from all of the various roles we've talked about through the pillars. We each are gathering in unique spots. So things that you'll be able to see moving forward with this, we're going to set up a series of monthly style meetings where very differing topics throughout the year. We're going to do, sometimes they'll be teaching each other what an institution is doing really well within the space, or sometimes it's maybe let's chat with CMMC or review board auditors, someone who is in a different place within this community and has a different perspective. So we'll be bringing in speakers like that. We also would like to continue gathering in some capacity, and right now it says 6 half-day workshops. We'll figure out what that means as a specific item. And through that, I think we can also develop the roadmap of what should we really be keeping our eye on. And like one item that jumps out right now is the student item that's jumping onto each of our radars. And here we are all sending people to go figure out what this means in their space. So really excited. And this is absolutely proof of where we got through these workshops. So I suppose that's everything. I will start maintaining the list from the attendance today. We will start doing the circuit, but this is actually day one of where we're announcing it to the community since it's that brand new.
And Carolyn, if I want to make some comments on some of the pillar chapters, I know there will be a lot of work done to consolidate those into one voice and a paper. But if I want to make some comments on the specific pillars, I can just click on the link that Anne Marie just put in the chat, and everything is set to comment now.
Thank you.
And I should feel free to just go in and do that if I want to. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Good.
Comment away.
Thank you. And that's 10 days that commenting is open for, and then we'll close commenting on those docs.
Till June 10th.
June 10th. Yeah, perfect.
This is the second. It's not quite 10 days.
Yes, that's
Anyhow,
true.
we are at time. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.